The winds of Borealis did not just blow. They sang a deep baritone song that vibrated in the marrow of anyone foolish enough to live in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant. For the residents of Cloudreach, that song was the lullaby of everyday existence, a constant reminder that only a few thousand feet of crystallized lattice and gravity mesh separated them from the crushing depths below. Cloudreach was not a city of grand monuments or soaring spires. It was a barnacle clinging to the side of a leviathan, a scrappy collection of rusted modules, floating docks, and repurposed ship hulls, all tethered together by the glowing, pulsing web of the sky crystal lattice. It was a place for people who did not want to be found, or for those who had nowhere left to fall. Inside the tilted comet, the roar of the wind was muffled to a low thrum. The establishment sat on the very edge of the eastern sector, a glass-walled protrusion that offered the best and most terrifying view of the storms churning in the troposphere. It smelled of ozone-seared spices and the heavy, sweet scent of hydraulic fluid that seemed to permeate every inch of the town. Sarah Nix moved through the crowded dining room with the fluid grace that only a Falari could possess. She carried a tray, laden with 3 steaming bowls of spiced broth, and a pitcher of amber ale weaving between the tables, without a single drop spilling. Her long, tufted tail acted as a rudder, twitching subtly, to counterbalance her movements as the floor shifted beneath her feet. The town was always moving, bobbing gently on the magnetic currents. But today, the sway felt heavier, like a boat taking on water. Sarah's ears pointed and swiveled atop her head, flicked toward the window. Her whiskers, sensitive enough to detect a drop in barometric pressure from a mile away, trembled. "You are twitchy tonight, Whiskers," a gruff voice grumbled from table 4. It was a Tellarite miner, his skin like cracked granite. Sarah set his ale down with a practiced smile that showed just the tips of her fangs. "Just the weather, old man. The lattice is singing a high note today. Make sure you tip me before the gravity shifts and your credits roll off the table." The miner chuckled, the sound like stones grinding together. Sarah moved on her bare feet, gripping the textured metal floor. She wore the standard apron of the Tilted Comet, but she had personalized it with a few pinned scraps of colorful silk, a small rebellion against the gray and rust of her world. The fur on her arms and the sides of her face was a soft cream color, transitioning to a darker, tawny shade at her extremities. She paused by the service station, glancing at the chronometer on the wall. It was nearly 7 in the evening. The dinner rush was beginning to peak. Most of the patrons were regulars, miners, cloud harvesters, and drifters who had stopped for fuel and never left. But her eyes drifted to the entrance, waiting for the chime of the door sensor. They were late. Usually, Aaron and his daughter walked in at 6:45 on the dot. Aaron Cole was a creature of habit, a man who treated unpredictability as a personal enemy. He was a human, a species that Sarah found exhaustively complicated. Yet Aaron seemed determined to be as simple as a wrench. He fixed things. He paid his bills. He raised his daughter. He drank black coffee that smelled like burnt rubber. The door chime sounded. A gust of cold, thin air swirled into the warmth of the cafe, carrying the scent of impending rain. Aaron stepped in, shaking the moisture from his heavy canvas coat. He looked older than his 30-odd years, with lines etched around his eyes and a permanent smudge of grease on his left cheekbone that no amount of scrubbing seemed to remove. He was not a large man, but he held himself with a density, a gravity that made him seem immovable. Beside him, clutching his hand, was Mira. 7 years old, with hair the color of polished copper, and eyes that tried to devour the entire world at once. She was bouncing on her toes, a stark contrast to her father's weary trudge. "Sarah," Mira chirped, her voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. Sarah's tail gave an involuntary happy flick. She grabbed 2 menus and glided over to their usual booth, the one furthest from the window, tucked safe in the corner. Aaron hated the window seats. He never said why, but Sarah suspected he did not like looking down. "Late today," Sarah noted, sliding the menus onto the table. I was about to send a search party, or at least a very concerned drone. When sheer on the lower suspension bridge, Aaron said, his voice a low rumble. He helped Mira up onto the bench seat. Took longer to secure the clamps than I thought. He looked tired. Not the usual physical exhaustion of a 12-hour shift, hanging from a suspension cable, but something deeper. His eyes, usually a sharp, observant gray, were clouded. He did not look at Sarah. He was looking past her, toward the window he usually avoided. Cocoa, Sarah asked, looking at Mira. I can add extra marshmallows. I know your dad thinks sugar is a controlled substance, but I am the captain of this table. Mira giggled, swinging her legs. Yes, please, and extra whipped cream. You are pushing your luck, kid, Aaron said, but there was no heat in it. He finally looked at Sarah, but his gaze didn't quite land on her. It drifted to her ear, then to the wall behind her. Coffee, black, and the stew if you have any left. Coming right up, Sarah said. She lingered for a fraction of a second. Usually, Aaron would make a small joke. He would ask if she had caught any sky mice, or if her tail had a mind of its own today. Today, nothing. Just a tight jaw and fingers drumming a silent, erratic rhythm on the tabletop. Sarah turned and headed back to the kitchen, her whiskers twitching again. The air in the cafe felt thick, charged with static. It was not just the storm outside. It felt like the pressure before a lightning strike. As she waited for the coffee to brew, the floor beneath her gave a sudden, sharp lurch. It was not a sway. It was a shudder. A distinct, vertical drop of perhaps an inch, followed by a vibrating correction. Cups rattled in their saucers. A few patrons stopped talking, looking around nervously. Sarah froze. Her ears swiveled back, pressing flat against her skull. To a human, it was just a bump. To a Falari whose ancestors had hunted on floating rocks, where a misstep meant death, it was a scream. The sky crystal lattice. The massive energy web holding the town aloft had skipped a beat. It was a dissonance in the song, a sour note in the harmony of gravity and magnetism. She gripped the counter, her claws extending slightly into the wood. Don't drop. Don't drop. Out in the dining room, Aaron Cole went rigid. Sarah watched him from the pass-through window. He had stopped drumming his fingers. His hand was now pressed flat against the table palm, down fingers splayed wide. His eyes were closed. The shuddering vibration in the floor intensified for a second, a low, grinding moan of metal on crystal. Then, Aaron exhaled. It was a long, slow breath. His fingers made a microscopic movement against the table, a gentle drumming, but in a specific complex pattern. Tap, tap, press, drag, tap. Instantaneously, the shuddering stopped. The cafe settled. The hum of the lattice returned to its normal B-flat drone. The patrons, who had been holding their breath, laughed nervously and went back to their meals. Just a thermal pocket, someone shouted. Ride the wave, boys, Sarah stared at Aaron. He withdrew his hand from the table and wiped it on his pants, looking almost guilty. He opened his eyes and saw Mira staring at him. He forced a smile, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. It is okay, he mouthed to his daughter. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She had seen that before. Over the last year, whenever the town groaned a little too loudly, or a bridge swayed a little too far, Aaron was there, and things just settled. She loaded her tray and walked back to the table. She needed to act normal. Here we are, she announced, placing the mugs down. One heart attack in a mug for the gentleman, and one sugar coma for the lady. Mira grabbed the cocoa with both hands, the warmth seeping into her gloves. Did you feel the house jump, Sarah? It was like a hiccup. Cloudreach has bad digestion, Sarah quipped. Too much heavy gas in the diet. She looked at Aaron. He was staring into his coffee as if the black liquid held the secrets of the universe. You okay, Aaron? She asked, dropping her voice. You look like you are holding up the sky. Aaron flinched. He looked up, and for a second the mask slipped. Sarah saw naked terror in his eyes, a raw, frantic panic that he quickly wrestled back behind a wall of stoicism. "Just a long week," he said, his voice rough. "The anchor bolts on Sector 7 are corroding faster than they should. The atmosphere is acidic this time of year." "Well," Sarah said, her tail curling anxiously around her leg, "eat your stew. You cannot fix bolts if you pass out from hunger." "Right," Aaron said. "Thanks, Sarah." He did not call her Whiskers. He did not smile. He picked up his spoon and began to eat mechanically, his eyes darting to the window every few seconds, watching the violet and gray clouds churning below the town's foundation. Sarah moved away to attend to other tables, but she kept one ear swiveled toward them. She heard the soft murmur of Mira's voice, telling her father about her day at the learning center, about a drawing she made of a cloud whale. Aaron answered in monosyllables. "That is good, sweetie. Really. Eat your vegetables." It was heartbreakingly normal, and yet entirely wrong. 40 minutes passed. The cafe grew louder as the evening crowd thickened. Smoke from pipeweed drifted in the air. Sarah was busy dealing with a table of rowdy Star Freighter pilots who wanted to know if Filari landed on their feet, if thrown out a window. She was explaining with polite menace that they also had claws that could shred a vac suit in 3 seconds, when she noticed table 4 was empty. She blinked. She had turned her back for maybe 2 minutes to get a refill of ale. Mira and Aaron were gone. Sarah frowned. Usually Aaron waved. Usually Mira ran up and hugged Sarah's legs, burying her face in the apron, smelling of milk and rain. "Rude," she muttered, though worry pricked at her chest. She made her way to the corner booth to clear the table. The bowls were empty. The napkin was folded neatly, obsessively neat corners, aligned perfectly next to the empty coffee cup. But there was no credit chip on the table. Aaron never forgot to pay. He was meticulous about debt. He would count out the credits to the last decimal. "Aaron, you space brain," Sarah sighed, reaching for the dirty dishes. "You finally lost your mind." She picked up the plate where the stew had been. It felt heavy. Not just ceramic heavy. There was something underneath it, sitting on the scarred wooden table, hidden by the plate until this moment was a ring. Sarah froze. She set the plate down on the tray with a clatter. It was not a piece of jewelry one bought at the Sky Market. It was a band of dark matte metal, perhaps titanium alloy, or something rarer. It looked old. The surface was not smooth. It was etched with thousands of microscopic grooves, swirling and intersecting like a fingerprint or a topographical map of a sound wave. It sat there unassuming, yet Sarah felt the hair on her arms stand straight up. "What is this?" she whispered. She looked around. The door was closed. Through the glass, she could see the dimly lit walkway outside empty, except for swirling mist. She reached out to touch it. Before her skin even made contact, her whiskers flared forward. A sensation like static electricity snapped against her fingertips. The ring was warm. Not body heat warm, mechanically warm. It was humming. It was a sound so low that her ears, sensitive as they were, could barely register it. It was more of a vibration that traveled through her bones. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Curiosity, that fatal flaw of all felines, overrode her caution. Sarah picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, dense and substantial. She turned it over. There was no inscription on the inside, just more of those strange flowing lines. Without thinking, she slipped it onto the index finger of her right hand. The world snapped. It was not a sound. It was a shift in reality. Sarah gasped, dropping the tray. The metal crash of dishes hitting the floor was deafening, but Sarah barely heard it. Her senses exploded. Suddenly, she could feel everything. She felt the vibrations of the sky crystal lattice, not as a background hum, but as a roaring orchestra. She could feel the tension in the cables holding the tilted comet to the main dock, 3,000 pounds per square inch, on the north strut, 2,800 on the south. She could feel the wind pressing against the glass, a chaotic swirling pattern of pressure differentials. The ring on her finger pulsed in time with the lattice. It was like she had plugged herself into the town's nervous system. Her tail puffed out to 3 times its normal size. Her pupils dilated until her eyes were entirely black orbs. She could hear the tectonic grinding of the crystals miles below the town. She could hear the heartbeat of the building. And under it all, she heard a voice, not a voice of words, but of intent. A soothing, rhythmic pattern that had been keeping the town steady. Stabilize. Hold. Correct. Stabilize. It was the same rhythm Aaron had tapped on the table. Sarah! The shout broke the trance. The boss, a large, 4-armed reptilian named Goran, was standing over her. You dropped the tray. Are you having a seizure? Sarah blinked, gasping for air. She frantically pulled the ring off her finger. The roar of the world instantly vanished, replaced by the mundane clatter of the cafe and the throbbing of her own terrified heart. The super senses collapsed back into her normal, already sharp Filari perception. She shoved the ring deep into the pocket of her apron, her hand shaking. I am sorry, Goran, she stammered, crouching down to pick up the broken shards of ceramic. I slipped. Wet floor. I will pay for the dishes. Goran huffed, crossing 2 of his arms. You never slip. You are a cat. Clean it up. And take 5 minutes. You look like you saw a ghost. Something like that, Sarah whispered. She cleaned the mess with trembling hands. She could still feel the phantom sensation of the lattice humming against her skin, a ghost touch that lingered where the ring had been. Why would Aaron leave this? Why leave it under a plate like a piece of trash? And why did it feel like it was alive? She finished her shift in a daze. Every time she moved, she was hyper-aware of the floor beneath her. The town felt fragile now. Before, the lattice was just there, solid, reliable. Now that she had felt the tension in the cables, the stress fractures in the crystal, she realized Cloudreach was not floating. It was hanging by a thread. At 10 o'clock, the cafe closed. Sarah hung up her apron, transferring the ring into the pocket of her leather flight jacket. It sat there, like a lump of uranium, heavy and accusing. She stepped out into the night. The wind was biting. The walkways of Cloudreach were narrow, suspended over the abyss by glowing blue cables. Lanterns swayed, casting long, dancing shadows. Sarah walked toward her apartment in the lower residential district, but she found herself stopping at the railing of the East Promenade. She gripped the cold metal bar, looking out into the vast, swirling dark of Borealis. Below, the clouds were lit by flashes of internal lightning, vast storms, the size of continents, silently exploding in the deep. She pulled the ring out. In the dim light of the street lamp, the metal seemed to drink the illumination. "Who are you, Aaron Cole?" she asked the wind. He was a mechanic, a single father, a man who tipped 20% and never complained about the coffee, but a man who could tap a table and stop an earthquake, a man who carried a ring that felt like the ignition key to a starship. She turned the ring over in her fingers. The hum was fainter now, that it wasn't on her finger, but it was still there, a low, persistent plea. She thought about how he had left. No goodbye, no wave, just the silence. He is running, she realized. The thought hit her with the force of a physical blow. He left this because he is not coming back. Anger flared in her chest, hot and sharp. How dare he? How dare he leave Mira's empty cup there and just vanish? Where was Mira? Had he taken her? Or was he dragging that poor girl into whatever dark hole he had crawled out of? Or a colder thought intruded. Or was he scared? She remembered the look in his eyes when she asked if he was holding up the sky. It wasn't just fear. It was exhaustion. The look of a man who had been holding a heavy weight for so long that his muscles were tearing apart. "Are you asking for help, you idiot?" she murmured, rubbing the textured surface of the ring with her thumb. "Or are you saying goodbye?" As if in answer, the sky changed. Far out in the distance, deep within the purple bruising of the cloud layer, a streak of light appeared. It was not lightning. lightning jagged and forked. This was a straight, piercing line of brilliant violet light. It cut through the clouds horizontally, moving against the wind. It was silent, but the ring in Sarah's hand suddenly grew hot. The walkway beneath her feet shuddered. Not a little bump this time. A heave. A nearby lantern post rattled violently. From across the town, a warning siren began to wail, a low, mournful sound that signaled atmospheric turbulence. Sarah gripped the railing, her claws digging into the metal. The violet light flared once bright as a second sun, and then vanished. But the ring was vibrating now, a frantic buzzing alarm in her palm. Sarah looked at the empty darkness, where the light had been then, back toward the residential sector, where Aaron lived, or where he used to live. "You do not get to do this," she hissed, her ears pinning back. "You do not get to drop a bomb on my table and walk away." She shoved the ring onto her thumb. It was too big, but she curled her finger to keep it there. The rush of sensory data hit her again, but this time she braced for it. She filtered out the wind, filtered out the creaking metal, and focused on the hum. It was pulling her. The resonance in the ring was not just a sound, it was a compass. And it was pointing straight toward the industrial district, toward the Sector 7 anchor bolts Aaron had mentioned. Sarah Nix, waitress, tip-dependent service worker, and citizen of a town that was currently trying to shake itself apart, took a deep breath of thin, ozone-rich air. "I am going to kill him," she decided. "And then I am going to charge him for the cocoa." She turned and began to run, her tail streaming behind her, like a banner of war heading straight into the heart of the gathering storm. The first crystals of snow began to fall, drifting down into the infinite dark below. Cloudreach groaned in its sleep, waking up to a nightmare, and the only person who knew the lullaby had just walked out the door. The morning light over Aurealis was not so much a sunrise as it was a bruising of the horizon. The thick, gaseous atmosphere of the planet turned the early light into a spectrum of violent violets and bruised oranges, casting long, shivering shadows across the suspended walkways of Cloudreach. Sarah Nix adjusted her scarf, pulling it tighter against the biting wind that whipped through the gaps in the floor plating. She had traded her shift at the Tilted Comet with a younger waitress, who owed her a favor, all for the sake of a 3-mile trek across the most unstable residential sector of the town. The ring in her pocket felt heavy, far heavier than a small circle of metal had any right to be. It knocked against her hip bone, with every step a persistent rhythmic reminder of the man who had left it. "Humans," Sarah muttered to herself, her ears swiveling back to catch the groan of a suspension cable somewhere to her left. Always so dramatic. First he leaves no tip, which is a crime in itself, and then he leaves a piece of jewelry that hums. Who does that? She navigated the swaying bridges of the low-hang district with practiced ease. Here, the sky crystal lattice was older, the glow of the energy web dimmer than in the commercial zones. The houses were mostly refurbished cargo pods, or hollowed-out geodes tethered to the main struts by glowing cables that hummed in the wind. To a human, the constant motion might induce nausea, but to a Falari, it was merely a texture of the ground. Sarah's tail acted as a subconscious counterbalance, twitching left when the walkway listed right, keeping her center of gravity perfectly aligned. Yet, she was annoyed. She told herself she was annoyed. It was easier to be angry at Aaron Cole for being careless than to admit she was worried about the look in his eyes the night before. She reached the coordinates listed in the town directory for Cole A. It was a modest dwelling, a rounded metal habitation unit painted a peeling shade of blue, suspended slightly apart from its neighbors on a secondary strut. A small platform served as a front porch, where a wind chime made of scrap engine parts clinked softly. Sarah hesitated, her hand hovering over the door chime. She could feel a faint vibration coming from the house, not the mechanical hum of a generator, but something organic, like a heartbeat. The ring in her pocket grew warm in response. She pressed the chime. There was no answer for a long moment, only the whistling of the wind. Then, the sound of light scurrying footsteps echoed from inside, and the door slid open with a hiss of hydraulics. It was not Aaron. Mira stood there, looking smaller than usual, in a pair of oversized mechanic's coveralls that were clearly her father's, rolled up at the sleeves and cuffs. Her copper hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her face was smudged with luminescent grease. Sarah, Mira's face, lit up a bright sun in the gray morning. "Did you bring breakfast? Dad says I cannot have cake for breakfast, but he is not here, so the rules are technically suspended." Sarah couldn't help but smile. The tension in her shoulders dropped an inch. "Nice try, little kit. No cake. Is your dad home?" Mira's smile faltered just for a second before she stepped back to let Sarah in. "No. He left really early. Like, before the second moon set early. He said he had to check a fluctuation in the western perimeter." Sarah stepped inside. The interior of the house was warm and surprisingly cozy. The walls were lined with shelves full of scavenged parts, books, and strange glowing trinkets. In the center of the room lay a disassembled wind kite, its skeletal frame spread out like a prehistoric bird. "He did not say when he would be back," Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "He said to stay inside and lock the door," Mira said, kneeling back down by her kite. She picked up a laser soldering tool with practiced familiarity. "He looked funny. Not, ha-ha funny. Weird funny. Like he was listening to a song nobody else could hear." Sarah's whiskers twitched. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring. The metal seemed to drink the light of the room. "He left this at the diner last night," Sarah said, crouching down to be at eye level with the girl. "I think he made a mistake, Mira. This looks important. I wanted to give it back to him." Mira looked at the ring. She did not reach for it. She stared at the intricate patterns etched into the dark metal, her expression solemn in a way that belonged to a much older person. "He did not make a mistake," Mira said softly. "It is a very nice ring, Mira," Sarah pressed, holding it out. "It might be worth a lot of credits. Or it might be a family heirloom. You should keep it safe until he gets back." Mira shook her head vigorously. "No, I do not want it. It makes my teeth itch when I hold it. Besides, if Dad left it under the plate, he meant for you to find it. He does not do accidents. He organizes his toolbox by screw thread density, Sarah. He does not accidentally leave a ring under a dirty plate." "But why me?" Sarah asked, frustration bubbling up again. "I am just the waitress who gives him extra napkins." Mira looked up, her green eyes sharp. "You are the only person he talks to who is not a machine or me. And you smell nice, like cinnamon and ozone." Before Sarah could formulate a rebuttal to that undeniable logic, the world tilted. It was not a metaphor. The floor of the house pitched violently to the right, angling down a sharp 20 degrees. Tools slid off the shelves. The wind kite skittered across the floor. Mira yelped, sliding toward the wall, but Sarah moved with the explosive speed of her species. She lunged, grabbing Mira by the back of the oversized coveralls and hooking her claws into the floor grating to anchor them both. Outside, the sky screamed. A siren began to wail across Cloud Reach, a desperate rising tone that signaled a Class 5 structural event. Through the viewport window, Sarah saw the sky outside turn a blinding magnesium white. "Sky flare," Sarah shouted over the roar of the wind. It was too early in the season. Sky flares, massive eruptions of charged plasma from the deep atmosphere of Aurealis, were supposed to happen months from now, during the convective solstice. This was impossible. The house groaned, the metal struts screaming under the sudden shift in gravity and magnetic pressure. The light outside was not just bright. It was physical. It pressed against the hull of the house, heating the air instantly. Sarah felt the ring in her hand, she had not let go of it, suddenly burn with cold fire. "Get under the table," Sarah commanded, shoving Mira beneath the heavy workbench bolted to the floor. "Dad is out there," Mira cried, her voice thin with terror. "He is on the perimeter." He knows how to take cover, Sarah lied her own heart, hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Stay down! The shaking intensified. It felt as though a giant hand had grabbed Cloudreach and was shaking it like a rattle. The sound was deafening, the screech of metal past its yield point, the thrum of the crystals trying to compensate. Sarah's senses were overwhelmed. Her ears rang with high-frequency noise. Her whiskers felt like they were burning from the static charge in the air. And then she felt the presence. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure in her mind amplified by the ring she was still clutching. It felt like a wave of calm water hitting a raging fire. Stabilize. Hold. Center. The door to the house did not open. Instead, the emergency maintenance hatch in the floor burst inward. A figure vaulted up from the crawl space below, moving against the violent tilting of the room with impossible grace. It was Aaron. He looked wild. His coat was torn, his face streaked with soot and blood. But his eyes were glowing, literally glowing, with a faint, azure luminescence that matched the sky crystal lattice outside. He did not look at Sarah or Mira. He lunged toward the main structural pillar in the center of the room, the one that connected the house to the primary suspension cable. "Dad!" Mira screamed. Aaron slammed his open palm against the metal pillar. The moment his skin touched the metal, a shockwave of visible sound rippled through the room. It was a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in Sarah's teeth. Aaron closed his eyes, his face contorted in concentration. The veins in his neck stood out, pulsing with that same faint blue light. Adjust frequency. Harmonic dampening. 3, 2, 1. Sarah heard the words, but Aaron had not spoken them. She heard them inside her head, clear as a bell transmitted through the ring in her hand. The house stopped shaking. It didn't slow down. It simply stopped freezing in place despite the chaotic winds raging outside. The screaming of the metal ceased, replaced by a harmonious hum that matched the frequency radiating from Aaron. He stood there for a long minute, breathing heavily, sweat dripping from his nose. Slowly, the blue glow faded from his eyes, leaving them their usual stormy gray. He slumped against the pillar, sliding down until he hit the floor. The sky flare outside began to fade, the blinding white light dimming to a sullen, bruised purple. Silence rushed back into the room, louder than the noise had been. Sarah slowly unhooked her claws from the floor grating. She helped Mira crawl out from under the table. The little girl ran to her father, burying her face in his neck. "I knew you would come back," Mira sobbed. Aaron wrapped his arms around her, his hands shaking violently. "I am here, baby. I am here. It is okay." The house held. Sarah stood over them, her tail lashing back and forth, a sign of extreme agitation. She looked at the ring in her hand, then at the exhausted man on the floor. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp realization. "You are not a mechanic," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, cutting through the emotional scene. Aaron looked up. He flinched when he saw the ring in her hand. He gently disentangled himself from Mira, kissing her on the forehead. "Mira, honey, go check the pressure gauge in the back room. Make sure the seals are green. Can you do that for me?" Mira looked between the two adults, sensing the shift in atmosphere. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and scurried off into the back. Aaron pulled himself up to a sitting position, leaning his back against the pillar. He looked utterly defeated. "I was going to tell you," he croaked. "When?" Sarah demanded. "When the town fell into the clouds. What was that, Aaron? I felt it. I felt you inside my head. You did not just fix the house. You told the house to stop moving and it listened." Aaron sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I am a resonant." The word hung in the air. Sarah had heard it before, but only in old stories, rumors, from the time when the floating cities were first built, centuries ago. Resonants were the ghost stories of the atmosphere, people born with a genetic mutation that allowed their nervous systems to interface directly with the crystalline structures of the lattice. "Resonants are myths," Sarah said. "Or they are dead." The government gathered them all up 50 years ago for research. Most are dead, Aaron corrected. Some of us just learned to be very, very quiet. He gestured to the ring in Sarah's hand. That is why I tried to give you that. I felt the flare coming. I knew I might have to go out to the perimeter and do what I do. If I did not come back, I wanted someone to have it who could actually use it. Use it for what? Sarah stepped closer, looming over him. What is this thing, Aaron? It is a tuning ring, Aaron explained, his voice weary. Old tech. Pre-collapse. It acts as an amplifier. For a human, it just helps focus the mind. But for a Falari. He looked at her, his gaze traveling to her twitching ears and the fur on her arms. Your species is naturally sensitive to gravity waves. You feel the lattice better than any human ever could. With that ring, you are not just a receiver, Sarah. You are a conduit. Sarah looked at the ring with new horror and fascination. You turned me into an antenna. I turned you into a backup plan, Aaron said softly. If I died out there, someone needed to be able to hear the lattice breaking so they could get Mira to the escape pods in time. You were the only one I could trust to hear it. You trust me to save your daughter, but you do not trust me enough to say goodbye, Sarah's voice cracked. She was angry, furious even, but beneath it was a stinging hurt that surprised her. Aaron looked away, shame coloring his cheeks. I am not good at goodbyes. The last time I said goodbye to people, he trailed off. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. Tell me, Sarah said. It was not a request. Aaron closed his eyes. I lived in a town called High Haven. Smaller than Cloudreach, but newer. Better tech. I was the lead structural engineer. I was young, arrogant. I thought I could tune the lattice perfectly. I pushed the resonance frequency too high, trying to maximize stability. He swallowed hard. I created a feedback loop, a harmonic dissonance. When the storm hit, I couldn't stop it. I froze. The lattice shattered. Sarah gasped. She remembered the news stories from 10 years ago. High Haven hadn't just fallen. It had disintegrated. 3,000 people lost to the pressure depths. I fell, Aaron whispered. I was in a maintenance pod that got blown clear. Mira's mother was on the main concourse. He did not finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Sarah felt her anger drain away, replaced by a hollow ache in her chest. She sank down onto the floor next to him, not touching him, but close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. So you came here, she said softly, to the edge of nowhere, to fix bolts and pretend you cannot hear the sky screaming. I try not to listen, Aaron said. But today was different. That flare was not natural, Sarah. The lattice didn't just break. It was attacked. Something tore it. Sarah looked at the ring again. She slipped it onto her finger. The hum returned comforting this time, a low purr against her skin. I felt it too, she admitted. When I put this on. It felt like the city was in pain. Aaron looked at her, and for the first time he really saw her. Not as the waitress, not as the funny alien with the tail, but as someone who shared the burden of his secret senses. I am sorry I dragged you into this, he said. You should give me the ring. You should go home, Sarah. It is not safe near me. Oh, shut up, Sarah said, though her voice was gentle. You owe me for the cocoa, and for the emotional trauma. You are not getting rid of me that easily. Before Aaron could respond, the door to the back room opened. Mira poked her head out. The seals are green, Dad, she chirped. She looked at the two of them sitting on the floor, shoulder to shoulder. Her eyes widened, and a mischievous grin spread across her face. Are you two done fighting? Mira asked innocently. Can we talk about the important stuff now? Like, is Sarah your girlfriend now? Because you guys were yelling at each other, just like the people in the Moonlit Duchess, right before they kiss. Aaron choked on his own spit. His face turned a brilliant shade of crimson that was visible even through the soot. Mira, he sputtered. No. We were discussing structural integrity and metallurgy. Sarah felt her own face heat up, the fur on her tail fluffing out until it looked like a bottle brush. Yes, metallurgy. Very boring adult stuff. No kissing involved. Zero kissing. Mira rolled her eyes with the supreme skepticism of a 7-year-old. Okay, whatever. But if you are going to stay, Sarah, you have to help make lunch. Dad burns the toast. The tension in the room broke. Aaron let out a laugh, a rusty, jagged sound but real. Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. I can make lunch, Sarah said, standing up and brushing dust off her pants. But only if your dad admits he needs help. Aaron looked up at her. The humor faded from his eyes, replaced by a solemn gratitude. I need help, he said quietly. More than I thought. The rest of the day was a blur of repairs. The sky flare had passed, but the aftershocks continued to rattle Cloudreach. Aaron spent hours securing the localized anchors of his sector, while Sarah helped Mira patch the roof of their module. It was strange, Sarah thought, how quickly she fell into the rhythm of their lives. She handed Aaron tools before he asked for them. He anticipated her movements, stepping out of the way of her tail without looking. The ring stayed on her finger. Aaron hadn't asked for it back, and she hadn't offered. It felt right there, a silent link between them. Night fell, bringing a temporary respite from the winds. Mira was asleep in her bunk, exhausted by the adrenaline of the day. Sarah climbed up the external ladder to the flat roof of the module. Aaron was already there, sitting with his legs dangling over the edge, staring down into the abyss. The clouds below were glowing with bioluminescent bacteria, swirling in vast, slow rivers of green and blue. Sarah sat down beside him. The metal was cold, but the air was still warm from the day's heat. She is a good kid, Sarah said. She is the only thing I did not break, Aaron replied. He took a sip from a flask and offered it to her. It was cheap, synthetic whiskey, burning and sweet. Sarah took a swig and handed it back. You did not break this town today, Aaron. You saved it. For now, he said darkly. But you felt it, didn't you, the dissonance? I felt it, Sarah nodded. I have always felt detached. My people, the Falari, we are nomads. We drift. I came to Cloudreach 5 years ago because I was tired of drifting. But I never felt like I landed. I was just hovering, like this town. She looked at him. I think that is why I liked watching you and Mira. You looked anchored. I wanted to know what that felt like. Aaron turned to her. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening the lines of worry. I have spent my whole life trying to be an anchor. But the heavier I make myself, the more I worry I will drag everyone down with me. Maybe you do not need to be heavy, Sarah said softly. She reached out her hand, brushing against his. The ring on her finger hummed, and she felt a spark jump between them, not static this time, but something warmer. Maybe you just need a better tether. Aaron looked at her hand, then up at her eyes. His gaze was intense, searching. For a moment, Sarah thought he might lean in. The air between them felt thick, charged with the same electricity that preceded a storm. Sarah, he started, his voice rough. But the universe, it seemed, had no interest in romance that night. Before he could finish his sentence, the horizon exploded. It wasn't like the morning flare. This was different. Far to the south, a column of light erupted from the deep clouds, shooting straight up into the vacuum of space. But this light was not white. It was a twisting, writhing helix of deep violet and sick neon green. It looked like a bruise spreading across the sky. The vibration hit them a second later. It wasn't a rumble. It was a tear. Sarah screamed as the sound ripped through her heightened senses, clutching her head. The ring on her finger burned hot enough to blister. Aaron scrambled to his feet, grabbing the railing with white-knuckled force. No, he whispered. No, no, no. The ribbons of light began to expand, spiraling outward like a hurricane made of aurora borealis. They lashed out, whipping through the sky crystal lattice. Wherever the light touched, the crystals went dark, their energy drained instantly. "What is that?" Sarah gasped, fighting to stay upright as the roof pitched beneath them. "It is an aurora maelstrom," Aaron said, his voice hollow with horror. "I have only read about them in the Founder's texts. It is a resonant storm. It feeds on the lattice frequencies." He looked at Sarah, and the terror in his face was absolute. "It is not just a storm, Sarah. It is a chain reaction. If that spiral hits the central node of Cloudreach..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The violet light was expanding fast, consuming the horizon, moving with a predatory intelligence toward the town. "We are not just going to fall," Aaron whispered, the wind tearing the words from his mouth. "Cloudreach is going to be unmade." He grabbed her hand. "We have to wake Mira. We do not have much time." Sarah looked at the approaching apocalypse, then at the man holding her hand. The connection between them through the ring was frantic now, a jagged line of panic and determination. "Then stop talking and move resonant," she snapped, pulling him toward the hatch. "You kept the house up. Now you are going to have to keep the damn world up." They dropped down into the darkness of the module, leaving the swirling, beautiful nightmare to consume the sky behind them. The sound of the world ending was not a bang, but a shriek. It was the sound of 1,000 violin strings, snapping at once, amplified by the hollow acoustics of the gas giant below. The sky flare had mutated. What had begun as a blinding flash of atmospheric discharge had twisted, curled, and solidified into something malevolent. The residents of Cloudreach, huddled in their swaying hab modules, looked up to see the sky torn open. The aurora maelstrom, as the older text files called it, was a vortex of violet and neon green light, spinning like a drill bit made of pure energy. It descended from the upper ionosphere, piercing the cloud layers, aiming directly for the fragile crystalline web that held the town aloft. To Aaron Cole, it looked like a memory he had spent 10 years trying to drink away. "Move!" Aaron roared, his voice barely audible over the screaming wind. He shoved a group of gawking tourists toward the emergency bulkheads of the central plaza. The ground beneath them pitched violently, tilting a terrifying 30 degrees. A crate of hydroponic melons slid past them, gathered speed, and shot off the edge of the walkway, vanishing into the infinite drop. "The anchor lines are singing in F-sharp," Sarah yelled, running beside him. She was on all fours now, her feline physiology taking over to keep her center of gravity low. Her tail was puffed to the size of a bottle brush, twitching spasmodically with every tremor of the deck. "F-sharp is bad, Aaron. F-sharp is the breaking frequency." "I know," Aaron gritted his teeth. He didn't need his resonant senses to know the town was dying. He could hear the physical groan of the metal. They were sprinting toward the eastern sector, the area closest to the descending vortex. It was also the location of the tilted comet. As they rounded the corner of the promenade, the scene before them stopped them cold. The tilted comet was no longer tilted. It was hanging. The primary suspension cable, a massive braided cord of carbon nanotubes and conductive crystal, was glowing a sickly, overheated red. The rock foundation upon which the cafe sat had fractured. The entire establishment was dangling over the abyss, held only by 2 secondary stabilizers that were groaning under the strain. Inside the glass walls, shadowy figures, Goran the owner, a few trapped patrons were pressed against the uphill side of the room, sliding helplessly as the floor angle increased. "The winch mechanism is jammed," a mechanic shouted from the maintenance gantry nearby. He was hammering uselessly at a frozen gearbox. "The magnetic locks are fused." Aaron didn't hesitate. He vaulted over the safety railing, landing heavily on the maintenance gantry. "Give me the wrench," Aaron barked, shoving the mechanic aside. "It is stripped," the man cried, his face pale with terror. "The torque is too high. We need a hydraulic ram to move this." "I said give me the wrench." Aaron grabbed the heavy tool. He jammed it into the manual override slot of the winch. He braced his boots against the railing, his muscles straining, veins popping in his neck. He was trying to manually crank a winch designed to lift 50 tons, fighting against the gravity of a supergiant planet. He was strong, but he was human. The gear moved a fraction of an inch, then slipped back with a screech that sent sparks showering over him. "Come on," Aaron snarled, sweat stinging his eyes. "Turn, you piece of junk." He was terrified. Not for himself. He had made peace with the idea of falling long ago, but for Mira, whom he had left in the concrete bunker of the town hall with the other children. And for the people inside that glass box. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Sarah. She had followed him onto the gantry, ignoring the safety protocols. "Aaron!" she shouted, her mouth close to his ear. "Look at the lattice." "I am busy," he yelled, heaving against the wrench again. "Look at it. The wrench is not going to fix this. The physics are broken, Aaron." Aaron looked down. Beneath the dangling cafe, the sky crystal lattice, the glowing energy web, usually invisible or faintly blue, was visible. It was fracturing. Great, jagged cracks of black anti-light were spreading through the energy field like spiderwebs on a windshield. The crystals weren't just failing to hold the weight. They were screaming in agony. The maelstrom above was sucking the energy out of them. It was a vampire storm. "If you force the gear, the crystal shatters," Sarah said, her voice trembling but hard as flint. "The physical lock is the only thing keeping the energy loop closed. You open that winch, the loop breaks, and the comet falls. And it takes half of Sector East with it." Aaron froze. She was right. He knew the engineering. He was trying to fix a software problem with a hammer. "I cannot stop the storm," Aaron whispered, his grip on the wrench loosening. "It is too big. I tried it at High Haven. I tried and I killed them all," the cafe groaned. One of the secondary cables snapped with the sound of a cannon shot. The building dropped another 10 feet, swinging wildly. Inside, people screamed. Sarah grabbed Aaron's face with both hands, her claws slightly extending, pricking his skin, forcing him to look at her. Her golden eyes were wide, terrified, but burning with a ferocity he had never seen. "I do not care about High Haven," she screamed over the wind. "I care about right now. I care about Goran. I care about my job, and I care about the fact that your daughter is 3 blocks away. And if this sector snaps, the shockwave knocks her bunker into the sky." Aaron flinched as if she had slapped him. "You are not a mechanic today, Aaron Cole." Sarah shook him. "Stop hiding behind that wrench. Stop being a coward and be the resonant. Use the damn ring." "I could break it all." Aaron choked out the tears, finally mixing with the sweat on his face. "If I sink with a storm this size, if I lose the rhythm, everything falls." "Then do not lose the rhythm," Sarah said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the dark metal band. She didn't hand it to him. She grabbed his left hand, the one gripping the railing, and jammed the ring onto his finger. "I am not letting you do this alone," she said. She placed her hand over his, her palm pressing the ring against his skin. Her furry fingers interlaced with his rough ones. "You drive," she said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "I will navigate. I can feel the noise, Aaron. I can hear the mess. You just make it music." Aaron looked at the ring. It was pulsing now, a heartbeat of pure white light that was visible even through his skin. He looked at the cafe dangling by a thread. He looked at Sarah, who was shivering but standing her ground. He took a breath. He let go of the wrench. He closed his eyes and turned his mind outward, dropping the mental walls he had built over 10 years of silence. Connect. The sensation was instantaneous and violent. It wasn't like the gentle hum of the house. This was like stepping onto the tracks in front of a speeding train. The roar of the Aurora maelstrom hit him. It was a cacophony of chaotic frequencies, a billion screaming voices of energy, tearing at the order of the lattice. It felt like ice water poured into his veins. It felt like fire in his brain. He gasped, his knees buckling. "I have you," Sarah's voice cut through the noise. Not her physical voice, but her thought voice, amplified by the ring, clear and resonant in his mind. Right here. Do not let go. Aaron felt her presence. It was different from the storm. It was warm, fuzzy distinctly, feline and sharp. She was acting as a filter. Her Filari physiology evolved to sense gravity shifts on floating rocks, was catching the chaotic waves of the storm and organizing them. She was taking the static and turning it into a beat. To the left, she projected. Sector 4. The node is bleeding energy. Plug it. Aaron didn't think. He reacted. He reached out with his mind, visualizing the fractured crystal beneath the cafe. He didn't try to fight the storm. He tried to harmonize with it. He found the frequency of the maelstrom, a high, screeching E-flat, and he projected a counter-frequency, a low, thrumming B major. He squeezed Sarah's hand. The ring flared. A shockwave of golden light exploded from the two of them. It wasn't destructive. It was solid. It washed over the maintenance gantry, over the dangling cafe, and down into the abyss. Where the gold light touched the black cracks in the lattice, the cracks sealed. Harder, Sarah urged. Her mental voice was strained, breathless. The vortex is fighting back. It feels hungry. Like a feral dog. It is just energy, Aaron projected back, though. He was trembling. It has no mind. Everything has a mind if you listen hard enough, Sarah retorted. Scold it, Aaron. Tell it to sit. The whimsy of the thought scolding a planetary storm gave Aaron something to hold on to. It broke the paralyzing grip of his fear. He almost smiled. He focused. He poured everything he had into the ring. Every year of repressed guilt, every moment of fear for Mira, every lonely night, staring at the ceiling. He poured it all into the desire for stability. The golden light intensified. It shot upward, meeting the descending violet vortex. When the two energies collided, the sound vanished. The wind stopped. For a heartbeat, the world was absolute silence. Then the flashback hit him. Suddenly Aaron wasn't on the gantry. He was back in High Haven. He was 22 years old. The alarms were blaring. The floor was tilting. He could see the faces of the people in the market, the mother clutching her basket, the old man playing chess. He could feel the lattice slipping through his mental fingers like wet sand. He pushed, and it broke. He screamed as the city fell, watching the lights spiral down into the dark. Hey, the voice was sharp. A mental claw swatting his nose. Quit watching reruns, we are live. Aaron gasped, snapping back to the present. He was hyperventilating. The golden light was flickering, turning a bruised purple at the edges. You were dropping us, Sarah's thought voice was fierce, but he could feel the terror underneath it. I told you if you drop me, I am going to haunt you. I will be the most annoying poltergeist in history. I will knock over your coffee every morning forever. The image Sarah as a ghost knocking over his coffee cup was so absurd, so grounded in the mundane reality of their life at the diner, that it anchored him instantly. I have you, Aaron whispered aloud. I have us. He didn't try to overpower the storm this time. He did what he had done for Mira 1,000 times when she had a nightmare. He didn't scream at the dark. He simply turned on a light. He changed the frequency. He stopped fighting the maelstrom, and instead invited it in, but on his terms. He wove the chaotic energy of the storm into the structure of the lattice. He took the violence and braided it into strength. Spin it, he told Sarah. Spinning, she replied. Together, they turned the ring. Physically, their hands rotated the metal band on his finger. Mentally, they spun the axis of the gravity well. The violet vortex above paused. Then slowly, it began to unwind. The harsh neon jaggedness softened. The purple faded, bleeding into the gold, radiating from Aaron. The sky crystal lattice beneath the town didn't just heal, it evolved. The blue-white color of the standard issue crystals deepened, warming, turning into a rich, honey gold amber. The cafe stopped swinging. The cables groaned one last time, then settled, the tension releasing, as the lattice itself rose up to cradle the structure. The rock foundation knitted itself back together, fused by the intense pressure of the realignment. The aurora maelstrom dissipated, scattering into a million harmless sparkles of light that rained down over Cloudreach like confetti. Aaron slumped forward, his legs giving out. Sarah caught him. She was trembling so hard, her teeth chattered her fur standing straight up, making her look twice her size. They collapsed together onto the metal grating of the gantry, gasping for air in the thin atmosphere. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant, confused murmurs of the townspeople emerging from cover. "Did we?" Aaron wheezed his throat, feeling like he had swallowed broken glass. "Did we die?" Sarah laughed. It was a hysterical, breathless sound. She flopped onto her back, staring up at the now calm sky. "I hurt too much to be dead. And you smell too much like engine grease for this to be heaven." Aaron looked at his hand. The ring was dull, again cold against his skin. But the lattice. He crawled to the edge of the gantry and looked down. The web of energy holding Cloudreach wasn't blue anymore. It was a permanent, pulsing gold. It felt different, too. It didn't feel like a machine humming. It felt like a living thing breathing. Slow, rhythmic, calm. "We changed it," Aaron whispered. "You changed it," Sarah corrected, pushing herself up to a sitting position. She wiped a smudge of soot from her nose. "I just held the flashlight." Slowly, the people began to approach. First, the mechanic Aaron had shoved aside. He stood 10 feet away, holding his useless wrench, staring at Aaron with eyes wide as saucers. Then Goran, the owner of the Comet, stumbled out of the stabilized cafe. He looked at the solid ground, then at the golden web beneath, and finally at Aaron. "Cole," Goran rumbled, his reptilian voice shaking. What are you—" Aaron struggled to his feet, using the railing for support. He wanted to run. He wanted to grab Mira and vanish. This was the moment he had dreaded for 10 years. The exposure. "I am a mechanic," Aaron said hoarsely. "I just fixed the stabilizer." "You did not use a wrench, son," an old woman's voice cut through the crowd. It was Mrs. Gable, the owner of the fabric shop down the lane. She was clutching her shawl, staring at Aaron with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "I saw the light. I felt it in my teeth. You are one of them, the Sky Singers, the Resonance." A murmur went through the gathering crowd. It wasn't hostile, not yet, but it was heavy with fear. People stepped back. A mother pulled her child closer. "Resonance bring down cities," a miner muttered from the back. "Everyone knows that. High Haven fell because of a resonant." Aaron flinched. He opened his mouth to apologize, to confess, to accept the blame. "High Haven fell because of a structural flaw in the bedrock," Sarah snapped. She stepped in front of Aaron, her tail lashing angrily. She looked small compared to the miners and dock workers, but she projected the ferocity of an apex predator. "And Cloudreach is still floating because of him," Sarah pointed a clawed finger at the miner. "You want to complain about the method? Fine. Go jump off the edge and see if gravity cares about your opinion. This man just held up a 50-ton building with his brain while you were crying under a table. Show some respect." The crowd went silent. Goran looked at Aaron, then slowly he nodded. "She is right," Goran said. "I do not care if he is a resonant or a wizard. The comet is still standing." Mrs. Gable stepped forward. She didn't retreat. She walked right up to Aaron, looking him up and down with sharp, bird-like eyes. "We cannot rely on the old machines anymore," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The crystals are old. The storms are getting worse. If you can do this, if you can keep the sky from falling," she grabbed Aaron's hand, the one without the ring. "Then you belong to the town now," she said. It wasn't a thank you. It was a demand. "You have to watch the lattice. You have to keep us safe. You cannot hide in your workshop anymore." Aaron felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders, heavier than the maelstrom. They weren't arresting him. They were drafting him. They were making him the Atlas of Cloudreach. Aaron started looking for an escape. He will think about it, Sarah interjected, smoothly pulling Aaron's hand away from the old woman. Right now, he needs to sit down before he passes out. Come on, hero. She steered him away from the crowd, guiding him back toward the solid ground of the promenade. The crowd parted for them, watching with eyes that held a terrifying amount of expectation. They didn't go far. They collapsed onto the bench outside the ruined entrance of the cafe. Aaron put his head in his hands. They know. It is over. We have to leave. Leave, Sarah scoffed, sitting next to him and leaning her head on his shoulder. And wear down, Aaron, look at the sky. You did not just patch a hole. You rewrote the code. You cannot leave your masterpiece. It is not a masterpiece, Aaron muttered. It is a cage. Now they expect me to hold it forever. We are a dream team. The shout came from a small, copper-haired missile, launching itself across the plaza. Mira slammed into them, wrapping her arms around both of their necks. She was covered in dust from the bunker, but she was grinning so hard, her face looked like it might split. I saw it on the monitors, Mira squealed. The light, and then the gold, and then the storm just went poof. And Dad, you were glowing, and Sarah, you were glowing. It was better than the cartoons. Aaron hugged his daughter, burying his face in her hair to hide the tears that threatened to return. I am glad you liked the show, monkey. Are you okay? Mira pulled back, looking at him with sudden seriousness. Then she looked at Sarah. Are you moving in now? Mira, Aaron warned, though he was too exhausted to put much heat into it. What? Mira shrugged. The house shook a lot less when you guys were holding hands. Just saying. Efficiency. Sarah laughed, a soft, tired sound. She didn't pull away from Aaron. Her shoulder was pressed firmly against his. Your dad is stuck with me, kid. Someone has to make sure he does not try to fix a Class 5 storm with a monkey wrench again. Aaron looked at Sarah. Her fur was matted with sweat. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue, and she had a scratch on her cheek. She looked beautiful. Thank you, he said. It was simple, but it carried the weight of the world he had just saved. Do not mention it, she murmured. But seriously, next time give me a heads up before we mind meld. It is very intimate for a first date. Aaron laughed. It felt good. It felt like breaking the surface of the water after drowning for a decade. Let's go home, he said. Later that night, the adrenaline had faded, leaving only a bone-deep ache. Mira was asleep in her bunk, clutching a piece of the golden crystal Aaron had found near the cafe, a souvenir of the great saving. Aaron sat at the small kitchen table. The tuning ring sat in the center of the table, silent and dark. Sarah was there nursing a mug of tea. She hadn't gone back to her apartment. Neither of them had suggested it. The lattice is stable, Aaron said, looking at the holographic readout on his datapad. More stable than it has been in 50 years. The efficiency is up 200%. So, happy ending, Sarah asked, her tail twitching lazily. No, Aaron frowned. He tapped the screen, enlarging a section of the schematic. Look at this. He pointed to the substrata readings, the data gathered from the deep foundation of the town during the maelstrom. When the lattice had turned gold, when they had combined their energies, the sensors had picked up something else. A response. What is it? Sarah squinted. This is the primary circuit. Aaron traced the web of the town. This is what I fixed. But look here. When the gold light hit the core, he pointed to a faint, ghostly line that extended downward away from the town, diving deep into the crushing depths of the gas giant's atmosphere. A wire, Sarah asked. A circuit, Aaron corrected. A dormant one. It woke up when we harmonized. It is sending a signal, Sarah, deep down, to a place that is not on any chart. What is down there? Sarah asked, a shiver running through her fur. Nothing lives that deep. The pressure would crush a hull. The founders lived down there, Aaron whispered, his eyes wide. Or at least they built something down there. The maelstrom did not just attack us randomly. It was trying to open a door. And I think we just knocked. Sarah looked at the ring, then at the map. The golden light of the new lattice pulsed gently outside the window, a heartbeat of safety. But beneath it in the dark, something was waiting for an answer. So, Sarah sighed, putting down her tea. We are not done saving the world yet. Aaron looked at her, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't look afraid of the future. No, he said, reaching out to cover her hand with his. I think we are just getting started. The days following the Aurora maelstrom were not marked by celebration, but by the grinding metallic sound of reconstruction. Cloudreach had survived, but it was bruised. The storm had left deep scars on the infrastructure walkways, twisted like ribbons, habitation modules dented by debris, and a pervasive smell of ozone that refused to dissipate. Aaron Cole had become a ghost in his own life. He was everywhere and nowhere at once. The town council, a loose collection of guild leaders and station elders, had effectively deputized him. Whenever a crystal node flickered or a gravity plate whined, they called for the resonant. He moved through the sectors like a man walking in his sleep, his toolbox in one hand, the other constantly rubbing his temples, as if trying to massage away the headache of 1,000 screaming structural stress points. Sarah Nix watched him from the counter of the Tilted Comet. The cafe had reopened thanks to a structural reinforcement team led by Aaron himself, but the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer just a place to eat. It was a pilgrimage site. People came to see the floor where the golden light had erupted. They came to whisper. "That is her," a miner whispered to his companion, pointing a soot-stained finger at Sarah. "The cat girl. They say she fed him the energy, like a battery." "I heard she is a witch," the companion grunted. "Falari magic. That is why the storm stopped. She sacrificed a sky rat or something." Sarah slammed a pitcher of ale onto the counter, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Her ears pinned back flat against her skull. "If I had magic," she announced loudly, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "I would use it to fix the tipping habits in this sector. Now drink up or get out. We need the table for people who actually pay." The miners grumbled and retreated to their mugs. Sarah sighed, wiping a rag across the counter. The suspicion was growing. For every person who thanked Aaron for saving their home, there was another who looked at him with cold, fearful eyes. They called him a savior to his face, but behind his back, they called him a lightning rod. If he can stop the storm, the logic goes, maybe he called it here in the first place. And she was guilty by association. The resonance pet, some called her. She looked out the window. The golden hue of the lattice beneath the town was fading slightly, settling into a warm amber. It was stable, but it felt like waiting. At 6 o'clock, Sarah hung up her apron. She didn't go to her apartment. She hadn't slept there in 3 nights. She grabbed a bag of leftover nutrient buns and a thermos of stew and headed for the maintenance shafts. She found Aaron in Sector 4, knee-deep in a junction box that looked like it had been chewed by a metal-eating shark. "You are late for dinner," Sarah said, dropping the bag on a clean patch of grating. Aaron didn't look up. "This regulator is off by 0.03%. If I do not recalibrate it, the North Bridge will start harmonizing with the wind in 2 hours. And if you do not eat, you will start harmonizing with the floor when you pass out," Sarah countered. She nudged his boot with her foot. "Eat. I put extra spice in the stew. It will wake up your taste buds, assuming you have any left." Aaron sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. He withdrew his hands from the machinery and wiped them on a rag. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble that was turning into a beard, and a tension in his jaw that looked painful. He sat on a crate, accepting the thermos. "Thanks, Sarah. How is Mira?" "She is fine," Sarah said, sitting cross-legged on the floor opposite him. "She is with Mrs. Gable learning how to knit gravity wool. Apparently she is making you a scarf that will keep you on the ground." "Metaphorically," Aaron managed a weak smile. "I need one." They ate in silence for a few minutes, The only sound, the distant hum of the ventilation fans. "They are talking about us," Aaron said suddenly. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the amber glow of the lattice beneath the grating. "The old guard faction. They say we tampered with the natural order. They say the maelstrom was a warning and we ignored it." "They are idiots," Sarah dismissed, waving a bun. "They are scared. Scared people look for someone to blame. Usually, it is the person holding the wrench." "Or the ring," Aaron murmured. He pulled the dark metal band from his pocket. He hadn't worn it since the night of the storm, but he carried it everywhere. "This thing is not just a tool, Sarah. It is a key. I can feel it pulling." "Pulling where down?" Aaron pointed at the floor. "Deep down. There is a signal, a sub-circuit that woke up when we combined our resonance. It is leading to the underside of the central hub." Sarah's tail twitched. "The underside? That is a sealed zone. Atmospheric crush depth." "Not for the founders," Aaron said. "I found a schematic in the old archives yesterday. There is a pressure-sealed vault down there. The heart node. If there is an answer to why the storms are targeting us, it is in that vault." He looked at her, his gray eyes intense. "I am going down there tonight, after I finish this regulator." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Okay. I will carry the flashlight." "No," Aaron shook his head. "It is dangerous, Sarah. Old system's unstable gravity plating. You stay with Mira." Sarah stood up, dusting crumbs off her pants. She walked over to him and poked him hard in the chest. "Listen to me, Resonant. You do not get to do the noble loner act anymore. You tried that for 10 years, and all it got you was a lonely dinner table in a town that almost fell. We are a team. The ring chose me, remember. It does not work without the battery." Aaron looked at her finger, then up at her face. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the fire in her golden eyes. He realized with a jolt of warmth that had nothing to do with magic that he didn't want to go alone. "Fine," he conceded. "But if you get squashed by a rogue piston, do not blame me." "If I get squashed, I will just haunt you," she grinned. "Come on, finish your regulator. We have a dungeon to explore." The descent into the underbelly of Cloudreach was a journey back in time. They bypassed the modern maintenance lifts, which didn't go low enough, and forced open a rusted manual hatch in the absolute keel of the city. The air here was stale, recycled for decades, without fresh intake. The walls were lined with thick lead piping and archaic fluid conduits that hissed and groaned like sleeping beasts. Aaron led the way holding a handheld lumen torch. Sarah followed her eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, her senses on high alert. "It is quiet here," Sarah whispered. "Too quiet. No wind." "We are inside the primary shield bubble," Aaron explained, his voice echoing in the narrow corridor. "This whole section is pressurized against the atmosphere. It is the oldest part of the town, the keel." They reached a heavy blast door with a wheel lock mechanism. It was covered in decades of grime. Aaron placed his hand on the metal. He didn't try to turn the wheel. He closed his eyes and sent a pulse of resonance into the lock. Open. The tumblers inside clicked loud, heavy sounds like gunshots. With a groan of protest, the door swung inward. The room beyond was not a maintenance closet. It was a library, or something like it. It was a circular chamber lined with banks of ancient crystal storage drives and drafting tables covered in physical paper, a rarity in the modern age. In the center of the room sat a model of Cloudreach, but it looked different, larger, more intricate. Aaron walked to one of the drafting tables. He brushed away the dust, revealing a complex architectural drawing. "This is it," he whispered. "The Founder's Resonant Circle. This is where they designed the lattice." Sarah wandered around the room, touching the strange artifacts. She picked up a drawing of a ring, 2 rings actually, one large one, slightly smaller. "Aaron," she called out. "Look at this." He came over. The drawing showed the two rings interlocking, creating a waveform pattern that matched the one etched on his own ring. The caption beneath read, Project Anchor, Primary Interface, and Harmonic Stabilizer. 2 rings, Aaron read. One for the conductor, the resonant who speaks the frequency, and one for the translator, the empathy-sensitive who filters the feedback. He looked at Sarah. That is why it worked. That is why I didn't burn out like at High Haven. I was trying to do both jobs. I was trying to speak and listen at the same time. It is a 2-person system. So you need a partner, Sarah said, feeling a strange flutter in her chest. Permanently. It seems so, Aaron murmured. He turned back to the papers, his face paling as he read further. What is it? Sarah asked, sensing his distress. This log, Aaron pointed to a handwritten journal. It is from one of the founders, a man named Silas. He writes about the heart node. He says the system requires a permanent anchor, someone to stay in the node and regulate the flow. He looked up at her, his eyes haunted. The first anchor did not just wear the ring. He integrated. He hooked himself into the machine. And, Sarah pushed. And he never came out, Aaron said. The official record says he died, but this says he ascended. He became part of the lattice, a ghost in the machine. Sarah felt a chill. So the system is fueled by a person. Not fueled, Aaron corrected. Guided. The lattice is too complex for an automated algorithm. It needs a human consciousness to navigate the chaos of the storm. A pilot who never sleeps. He stepped back from the table, looking sick. I learned under a founder, Sarah, years ago, before High Haven. He told me the system was perfect. He never told me it was a tomb. You knew the founder, Sarah asked softly. Aaron hesitated. He turned away, pacing the small room. I was a prodigy. They found me when I was a kid. High resonant potential. They took me to the academy. I studied under Master Vance. He taught me how to feel the crystals. But when High Haven fell, when I failed, I ran. I thought I was just a bad student. I did not know the game was rigged. You are not a bad student, Aaron, Sarah said firmly. You are the only one who kept the lights on. But why hide it? Why pretend to be a grease monkey? Because if I showed them what I could do, Aaron's voice broke. If I showed them I could hold the sky, they would put me in that machine. They would make me the anchor. And I have Mira. He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his face was devastating. I cannot leave her, Sarah. I cannot become a ghost in the wall. Sarah walked over to him. The space in the vault was tight, intimate. She reached out and took his hand, the one with the ring. We will not let that happen, she promised. We will find another way. The schematic showed 2 rings, right. Maybe the ascension was only necessary because they did not have the partner. Maybe they were trying to force a solo pilot to fly a 2-man ship. Aaron looked at the drawing again. Hope, fragile and terrifying, sparked in his eyes. Maybe. If the harmonic load is shared, the strain would be halved. No one would have to dissolve. See? Sarah smiled, though her heart was pounding. 2 heads are better than 1, especially when one has ears like mine. Suddenly, the floor of the vault lurched. It was a violent upward thrust. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Another quake! Sarah gasped, her claws extending instinctively. No! Aaron's voice was grim in the dark. He activated his lumen torch. That was not a quake. That was the elevator. Someone just activated the main lift to this level. I thought you said it was sealed. It was, Aaron said, extinguishing the light. Someone else has the codes. Hide. They scrambled behind a bank of crystal drives, squeezing into the narrow space between the machinery and the wall. It was a tight fit. Aaron's back was pressed against the cold metal, and Sarah was pressed against him. She could feel his heart beating against her chest fast, rhythmic, terrified. She could smell the scent of engine grease and old fear on him. The blast door groaned open again. Beams of harsh white light swept the room. "Clear," a voice echoed. "Readings indicate the vault was accessed 7 minutes ago." "Find them," another voice commanded. It was gravelly, authoritative. "The council wants the resident secured. If he is down here, he is looking for the node." Sarah stiffened. It was the head of the town's security, a man named Kale. And with him, the voice of the Old Guard faction leader. "We cannot let him destabilize the lattice again," the leader said. "If he won't take the seat willingly, we will force him, for the good of the town." Aaron's body went rigid against Sarah. His breath hitched. "They want to force him." Sarah reached up in the dark and placed her hand over his mouth, signaling him to be silent. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder. "I am here," she projected silently, hoping the ring would carry the thought. "Stay calm." The lights swept over their hiding spot, missing them by inches. The footsteps clanked around the room for what felt like an hour. "Nothing," Kale reported. "Maybe a sensor glitch. The rats down here are big." "Seal it," the leader ordered. "Weld the door. If he comes back, I want him trapped." The heavy grinding of a plasma welder echoed in the room. Aaron flinched with every spark. Finally, the footsteps retreated and the silence returned. Aaron let out a breath he had been holding for 5 minutes. He slumped against the wall, his head dropping onto Sarah's shoulder. "They are going to weld me into the sky," he whispered. "They know about the anchor seat." "They know a legend," Sarah whispered back, her voice fierce. "We know the science. We have the drawings." She pulled back slightly, to look at him in the dim light of the emergency strips that had flickered on. The space was so small, their noses were almost touching. "You are shaking," she murmured. "I am terrified," he admitted. "Not of dying, of losing her, of losing this." He looked at her lips. Sarah's breath caught. The adrenaline of the hide-and-seek had morphed into something else, a heightened awareness of the heat of his body, the roughness of his hands, the way he looked at her, not as an alien, but as an equal. "You are not going to lose anything," Sarah said. Her voice was uncharacteristically soft. "I am a very possessive waitress. I do not let my customers get welded into furniture." Aaron let out a short, jagged laugh. "You are ridiculous." "I am charming," she corrected. He leaned in. It wasn't a dramatic movie star kiss. It was a desperate, tentative pressing of foreheads, a sharing of breath in the dark. "Thank you," he breathed. "Shut up and figure out how to get us out of here," she whispered, but she didn't pull away. She leaned into him, letting the purr in her chest vibrate against his ribs, a calming frequency of her own design. Getting out involved crawling through 3 miles of ventilation ducts that smelled of century-old dust. When they finally popped out of a grate in the alley behind the tilted comet, it was nearly dawn. They looked like chimney sweeps. Sarah was covered in soot, her cream-colored fur now a dark gray. Aaron looked like he had been dragged through a coal mine. They stumbled into Aaron's module exhausted and aching. Mira was asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket with Mrs. Gable's half-finished scarf. She stirred as they entered. "Dad," she mumbled sleepily. "You look dirty." "Industrial accident," Aaron whispered, scooping her up to carry her to her bunk. "Go back to sleep, monkey." He tucked her in and came back to the main room. Sarah was in the tiny kitchen, trying to wash the soot off her face with a wet rag. "We cannot stay here," Aaron said, his voice low. "If the council is welding doors, they will come here next." "We need to go to the node," Sarah said, turning to him. "It is the only way to end this. If we can stabilize the system permanently without sacrificing you, they won't have a reason to hunt you." "And if we cannot?" Aaron asked. "If the system demands a life?" "Then we cross that bridge when we get to it," Sarah said. "But we do it together." Aaron looked at the kitchen table. He picked up a knife and began to chop vegetables for a breakfast they were too tired to eat. It was a nervous habit. I used to think, he said, slicing a carrot with unnecessary precision, that if I just kept my head down, I could give her a normal life. School, friends, maybe a pet sky dog. She has a pet cat lady now, Sarah said, taking the knife from him before he cut his finger. That is better. She stood next to him, their elbows touching. The domesticity of it chopping carrots at 4 in the morning while plotting to save the world hit Aaron hard. I can see it, he said suddenly. See what you hear. He gestured vaguely around the room. Not just for the crisis, but after. Mira likes you. She listens to you more than me. Sarah stopped chopping. She looked at the cutting board. I like it here, she admitted quietly. It is grounded. I have never had a ground before. Stay, Aaron said. It wasn't a question. When this is over, stay. Sarah turned to him. She reached up and wiped a smudge of dirt from his cheek. Get us through the node, Aaron Cole. Then ask me again. I might say yes. I might say I need a raise. Aaron smiled, and for a moment, the weight of the ring and the council and the storm vanished. There was just the smell of carrots and the warmth of the woman standing next to him. Deal, he said. Suddenly, the room vibrated. It wasn't the floor this time. It was the air itself, a low-frequency thrum that rattled the teeth in their skulls. The datapad on the table lit up red. Atmospheric breach detected, the computer voice announced. Sector 0, the heart node. Aaron grabbed the pad. His face went pale. The storm is back, he said. But it is not falling from the sky. It is rising. It is coming from the core. He looked out the window. The horizon was dark, but a faint, sickly green glow was emanating from below the cloud layer. The Aurora Maelstrom had found a back door. It is targeting the node, Aaron realized. It is trying to break the lock from the inside. If it breaches the core while there is no anchor. The whole lattice unravels, Sarah finished. Aaron looked at Mira's sleeping form in the other room. Then he looked at Sarah. We have to go, he said. Now, before the council locks down the sector. What about Mira? Sarah asked. We take her, Aaron said, his voice hard. I am not leaving her behind to be a hostage. If we go down as a family. The word hung in the air. Family. Sarah didn't flinch. She grabbed her leather jacket. I will get her coat, Sarah said. You get the ring. Aaron picked up the dark band from the table. He slipped it on. It pulsed with a frantic, eager light. Let's go find the heart of the world, he said. They moved fast. Aaron knew the service tunnels better than anyone. With Mira strapped to his back in a travel harness and Sarah scouting ahead, they bypassed the council patrols and made their way to the absolute bottom of Sector 7. Here, there was a hatch that didn't appear on any official schematic. It was a founder's hatch. Aaron placed his hand on it. The ring glowed. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dark, vertical shaft that dropped into the abyss. There was no elevator, just a service ladder that went down into the crushing dark. This is it, Aaron said, looking down. The secondary access to the heart node. Mira, sleepy, but surprisingly calm, clung to his neck. Are we going to the basement, Dad? Ideally, yes, Aaron said. The deep basement. Is there cake? If we succeed, Sarah said, patting the girl's head. There will be all the cake in the universe. Aaron looked at Sarah. Ready? No, she said honestly. But let's do it anyway. They stepped onto the ladder and began the long climb down, leaving the safety of Cloud Reach behind, descending toward the green fire that burned in the heart of the storm. The ring on Aaron's finger pulsed in time with Sarah's heart, a beacon in the suffocating dark. We are going to the end, Aaron whispered to himself. Not to die, to live. The descent was not measured in miles, but in eras. Aaron, Sarah, and Mira climbed down through layers of history. They passed the corroded skeletons of the original colonial barges that had first anchored in the clouds of Aurealis 200 years ago. They moved through silent pressurized chambers filled with vacuum-sealed machinery that hummed with a ghostly dormant power. The air grew heavy, not with pressure the grav plating held, that at bay, but with intent. "My ears feel funny," Mira whispered, her voice muffled against the back of Aaron's neck. She was strapped securely into the travel harness, her small arms wrapped tight around his shoulders. "It sounds like the wind is singing inside the walls." "It is just the crystals, monkey," Aaron said, though his own breath was coming in short, sharp rasps. "We are getting close to the source." Sarah led the way, her tail acting as a sensory probe in the gloom. Her lumen torch cut a stark white beam through the dusty air. "It is not just singing," she murmured, her ears swiveling toward a dark corridor on the left. "It is pleading. Can you feel it, Aaron? It feels like hunger." Aaron touched the ring on his finger. It was no longer cold metal. It was vibrating so intensely, it blurred at the edges of his vision. "It wants an anchor," he said grimly. "The system has been running on autopilot for too long. The Aurora Maelstrom wasn't an attack. It was an immune response. The lattice is trying to fever burn the instability out of itself." They reached the end of the ladder. A massive circular door stood before them, etched with the same flowing waveform patterns as Aaron's ring. There was no handle, no keypad. Just a depression in the center, shaped exactly like a human hand. Aaron hesitated. He looked at Sarah, then felt the weight of his daughter on his back. "Once we go in," Aaron said, his voice low, "I do not know if we can come back out. The energy density in there might scramble the grav lifts." "We are already in the basement, Aaron," Sarah said, her golden eyes reflecting the erratic pulsing of his ring. "We cannot go any lower. Open it." Aaron placed his palm against the metal. The door didn't groan or hiss. It dissolved. The metal simply phase-shifted into translucent energy and vanished, revealing the sanctum beyond. They stepped into the heart node. It was not a room of machines. It was a cathedral of light. The walls were lined with millions of raw sky crystals, grown into organic, interlocking shapes that resembled the interior of a giant lung. Liquid light, pure, unrefined resonance energy, flowed through transparent conduits in the floor and ceiling, pulsing rhythmically. Thump-thrum, thump-thrum. In the center of the spherical chamber, suspended over a pit of swirling neon green mist, was a pedestal of black obsidian. And on the pedestal, there was a hollow, a perfect circular indentation. "It is beautiful," Mira breathed, her fear momentarily forgotten. "It looks like the inside of a star." "It is the brain of the city," Aaron said, walking slowly toward the pedestal. He unclipped Mira's harness and set her down gently on the solid crystal floor. "Stay with Sarah, okay? Do not touch anything." "Dad," Mira grabbed his hand. "Why are you talking like you are going away?" Aaron didn't answer. He walked to the pedestal. The moment he approached, the liquid light in the walls flared brighter. A holographic interface sprang to life above the obsidian, projecting a swirling cloud of data points and schematics. But it wasn't just data. It was a log. A video file, corrupted and grainy, flickered into existence. A young man appeared in the hologram. He was barely 20, with sharp cheekbones and eyes full of arrogant brilliance. He was wearing the uniform of the Founders. Sarah gasped. She looked from the hologram to Aaron, then back again. "That is," Sarah started, her voice trembling. "Aaron." "It is me," Aaron said, his voice hollow. 15 years ago." The holographic Aaron spoke, his voice tinny and distorted. "Project Anchor is live. Resonance synchronization at 99%. I am initiating the primary merge. My name is Aaron Cole, lead architect of the Cloudreach Lattice. If this works, we will never need batteries again. I will be the battery." The recording flickered. The young Aaron's face twisted in sudden pain. "Wait. The feedback loop is too strong. It is not just taking the frequency. It is taking memory. It is eating the..." Static cut the image. Sarah walked up to the real Aaron. She grabbed his arm hard. "You are not a student," she accused, her voice shaking with the magnitude of the lie. "You did not just study under the founders. You built this. You are the architect." Aaron stared at his younger self, the ghost of his own hubris. "I designed the core. I was the prodigy, the one who thought he could outsmart physics. I volunteered to be the first anchor because I thought I could control it. I thought I could dip my mind into the stream and pull it back out." He looked at Sarah, his eyes wet with shame. "I was wrong. When I connected, it didn't just want guidance. It wanted everything. It tried to dissolve my consciousness into the network to create a permanent stabilizer. I panicked. I ripped the connection. That is what caused the shockwave at High Haven. It wasn't a structural flaw. It was me tearing myself out of the machine." "You ran," Sarah whispered. "I erased my files," Aaron said. "I faked my death in the chaos. I took Mira, she was just a baby, and I hid in the one place no one would look for the architect of the sky, a mechanic's shop in the slum district." He looked at the empty hollow on the pedestal. "But the system never forgot. It has been waiting for me to come back. The Aurora Maelstrom is the lattice throwing a tantrum because its pilot is missing." The room shuddered violently. The neon green mist in the pit below boiled up hissing against the containment field. A robotic disembodied voice echoed from the walls. "Anchor detected. Reinitialization sequence ready. Please insert an interface ring to begin permanent integration." "Permanent integration," Sarah repeated the words, tasting like ash. "What does that mean, Aaron?" "It means I put the ring in the slot," Aaron said quietly. "I merge with the node. The storm stops. Cloudreach stabilizes forever." "And you," Aaron didn't look at her. "My body stays here. My mind becomes the operating system. I will be everywhere, Sarah. I will be in the walls, in the wind, in the lights." "You will be dead," Sarah screamed. The sound echoed in the vast chamber, shattering the holy silence. "I will be the ghost," Aaron corrected softly. "But Mira will be safe. You will be safe." He stepped toward the pedestal. He began to slide the ring off his finger. "No." It wasn't Sarah who shouted. It was Mira. The little girl launched herself at her father, wrapping her arms around his waist and burying her face in his stomach. "No, Daddy. You cannot go into the computer. You promised we would fly the kite. You promised." "Mira, honey." Aaron tried to pry her loose, his hands shaking. "It is the only way. If I do not do this, the green fire will eat the whole town. Everyone will fall." "I do not care," Mira sobbed. "Let it fall. I do not want a house if you are not in it." Sarah stepped forward. She grabbed Aaron's wrist, stopping him from removing the ring. Her claws dug into his skin, drawing a tiny bead of blood. "She is right," Sarah hissed, her ears flattened against her skull. "This is not sacrifice, Aaron. This is suicide. You are doing this because you still feel guilty about High Haven. You think if you erase yourself, you erase the mistake." "It is the logic of the system," Aaron argued, desperate. "One life for 10,000. It is the only math that works." "The math is wrong," Sarah shouted. "Look at the schematic again. The drawing in the vault. There were 2 rings, Aaron 2. "The second ring was lost," Aaron yelled back. "It was a prototype. It was never." He stopped. He looked at the ring on his finger. Then he looked at the empty hollow on the pedestal. Then he looked at Sarah. "The ring I found under the plate," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "It wasn't just a ring. It was the other ring. The translator ring." Aaron froze. "No, that is impossible. I had the only active prototype. The other one was..." He trailed off. His eyes widened. "The other one was in the lab. When the explosion happened at High Haven, debris scattered everywhere. I thought it was destroyed." "It found its way to a pawn shop," Sarah said, her mind racing, connecting the dots. "Or a scavenger found it. And somehow it ended up in your pocket or your toolbox, and you didn't even know it until your subconscious made you leave it for me." "I did not leave it for you," Aaron stammered. I just—" "You left it because the lattice knew," Sarah said, stepping closer, crowding his space. "The lattice knew it needed a filter. It needed a feline. It needed someone who feels gravity like a song, not a math problem." She looked at the pedestal. "The system does not want a ghost, Aaron. It wants a partnership. It wants us." "It is too dangerous," Aaron whispered. "If we both connect and the surge is too strong, it will burn us both out. Mira will be alone." "I am not staying behind," Mira shouted, letting go of Aaron and grabbing Sarah's hand. "If you go into the light, I am coming too. I am the navigator, I hold the map." Aaron looked at the two of them. His daughter fierce and terrifyingly brave, and Sarah, the waitress, who had walked into the apocalypse with a thermos of stew and a heart full of fire. The green mist rose higher. The room began to shake. The robotic voice grew louder. "Critical instability. Anchor is required immediately." "We do not have time to debate," Sarah said. She took Aaron's hand, the one with the ring. She placed her other hand on top of it. "We do not put the ring in the slot," Sarah commanded. "We are the slot. We close the circuit right here. You, me, and Mira." "Mira." Aaron paled. "No, absolutely not." "She is the ground," Sarah said firmly. "You are the sky. I am the bridge. She is the anchor. She is the reason you want to stay, Aaron. If we filter the energy through that, through the desire to stay, the system won't eat us. It will ground us." It was insane. It was scientifically impossible. It was the kind of theory that would get an engineer laughed out of the academy. Aaron looked at Mira. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking at him with absolute trust. "Okay," Aaron whispered. "Okay." He knelt down. He took Mira's small hand in his left hand. Sarah took his right hand. Sarah reached down and took Mira's other hand. They formed a circle, a living circuit. "What do we do?" Mira whispered. "Just hold on," Aaron said, tears spilling down his cheeks. "And think about home. Think about the kite. Think about the cocoa with too much sugar." He looked at Sarah. "Ready?" "Always," she said. Aaron closed his eyes. He didn't take off the ring. He pushed his mind into it. But this time, he didn't push alone. He opened the floodgates. Connect. The world exploded into white. It wasn't pain. It was a rush of pure, unadulterated existence. Aaron felt the lattice hit him like a tidal wave. He felt the millions of tons of rock, the screaming tension of the cables, the chaotic fury of the Aurora maelstrom, trying to tear the door down. Usually, this was the moment the void tried to eat him. But this time, there was a filter. He felt Sarah. She was a warm, golden presence in the storm. She caught the jagged edges of the energy and smoothed them out. She took the screaming F-sharp of the breaking crystal and twisted it purring against the vibration, turning it into a low rhythmic thrum. Too fast, her thought voice echoed in the white. "Slow it down." Like a heartbeat. And then, he felt Mira. She wasn't filtering. She was holding. She was a dense, immovable point of gravity. She was the memory of a bedtime story. She smelled rain on a tin roof. She was the absolute refusal to let go. The lattice tried to pull Aaron up into the sky to scatter him into the network. Mira pulled him down. "Stay," the little girl's presence commanded. Not with words, but with the sheer gravitational force of love. "Stay here. We have dinner to eat." The three energies collided in the center of the ring. The architect's design, Falari's instinct, the daughter's hope. The black pedestal in the center of the room cracked. A beam of light, not green, not violet, but a blinding warm gold shot upward from their joined hands. It blasted through the ceiling of the heart node, up through the shaft, up through the keel, through the floor of the tilted comet, and into the sky. Above Cloud Reach, The Aurora maelstrom screamed one last time. The golden light hit the violet storm. It didn't fight it. It absorbed it. The jagged spirals of the maelstrom unraveled. They were pulled into the golden beam, transformed from chaotic noise into a harmonic melody. The energy washed back down into the lattice, but it didn't burn. It was illuminated. The entire town of Cloudreach lit up. The crystals turned from cold blue to a soft, living amber. In the heart node, the shaking stopped. The robotic voice spoke, but it sounded different now. Less mechanical. Almost satisfied. System recalibrated. New mode initialized symbiotic harmony. Anchor designated the Trinity. The white light faded. Aaron gasped, collapsing onto the cool floor. He was still holding their hands. He checked his body. He was still solid. He wasn't a ghost. He looked at Sarah. She was lying on her back, panting, her fur standing on end, sparking with tiny static discharges. She looked exhausted, but alive. He looked at Mira. The little girl was sitting up, blinking. She looked at her hands. That, Mira declared, was really loud. Aaron let out a laugh that sounded like a sob. He pulled them both into a pile, hugging them until his arms hurt. "We are here," he whispered into Sarah's neck. "We are still here." Sarah laughed weakly, burying her face in his shoulder. "I told you. I am a very possessive waitress." Aaron looked at his hand. The ring was gone. Or rather, it had changed. The dark metal band had dissolved. In its place, a faint, glowing tattoo of gold light encircled his finger. He looked at Sarah's hand. She had one too. And Mira had a small, faint bracelet of light around her wrist. "We are the circuit now," Aaron realized. "We do not need the machine. We carry the frequency." Sarah looked at the tattoo. She flexed her fingers. "Does this mean I get a discount on maintenance repairs?" "It means," Aaron said, kissing her forehead, "that you own the shop." The return to the surface was less of a climb and more of a victory lap. When the lift doors opened, they worked perfectly now. Smooth as silk, they stepped out into a town that had been reborn. The sky above Aurealis was no longer a bruising of violent storms. The Aurora maelstrom was gone. In its place, high above the town, was a permanent, gentle ring of golden aurora that acted as a shield against the radiation of the deep atmosphere. The people of Cloudreach were in the streets. They weren't panicking. They were staring at the lights. The crystals in the walkways were humming a soft, pleasant tune. The vertigo that had plagued the town for decades, the subtle swaying that made everyone walk with a stagger, was gone. The town felt solid, planted. When Aaron, Sarah, and Mira walked out of the maintenance sector, a silence fell over the crowd. Mrs. Gable was the first to approach. She looked at Aaron, then at the glowing band on his finger. "The shaking stopped," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "The wind is singing." "It won't shake again," Aaron said. His voice was calm, authoritative. He didn't look like the hiding mechanic anymore. He looked like the architect. "We fixed the foundation. Permanent fix." Mrs. Gable looked at Sarah. "The Trinity," Mira piped up, pointing at her glowing bracelet. "We fixed it with holding hands." A ripple of laughter and relief went through the crowd. It was a ridiculous explanation, but looking at the golden sky, everyone chose to believe it. "The council resigned an hour ago," Goran shouted from the back, pushing through with a tray of drinks. "They said the system locked them out. Said the administrator access had been transferred to—" He squinted at a datapad. "The family." Goran looked at Aaron and Sarah. "I assume that is you three." Aaron looked at Sarah. She smiled a tired, happy, crooked smile that made his heart do a somersault. "I guess it is," Aaron said. The cheer that went up was deafening. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the sound of a community that realized they weren't just survivors anymore. They were safe, 2 weeks later. The Tilted Comet was packed. It was always packed now. People claimed the food tasted better when the floor wasn't tilting 15 degrees. every 10 minutes. Sarah Nix moved through the tables, but she wasn't wearing her apron. She was wearing a sleek, practical jumpsuit made of Falari silk and mechanics leather. She still helped out. Old habits died hard, but mostly she managed the atmospheric monitoring station that Aaron had installed in the back corner of the cafe. It was the new town center. People came to watch the readouts of the lattice, which pulsed with a steady, rhythmic heartbeat that matched the three people sitting in the corner booth. Aaron was there, looking 5 years younger. The grease was gone from his face, though his hands were still rough. He was laughing at something Mira was saying. Mira was wearing a new set of coveralls with a badge that read Chief Navigator. Sarah slid into the booth next to Aaron. "Table 7 wants to know if you can turn the gravity down a bit," she teased. "They want to float while they eat their soup." "Tell them gravity is a safety feature, not a toy," Aaron grinned. "But I might lower the humidity. My knee is aching." "Old man," Sarah nudged him. "Architect," he corrected, puffing out his chest mockingly. The dinner was normal. Wonderfully, beautifully normal. They ate stew. They talked about Mira's school project, a model of the new lattice made of glitter and glue. They argued playfully about whether a sky whale could beat a starship in a race. When the meal was done, the crowd began to thin out. Aaron wiped his mouth with a napkin. He looked nervous. He started tapping his fingers on the table, not the resonant rhythm, just a nervous human tick. "So," Aaron said, clearing his throat, "I have been thinking." "Dangerous pastime," Sarah said, sipping her tea. "About the circuit," Aaron continued, ignoring her. "It is stable, but protocols suggest that redundancy is good. You know, official contracts." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Her tail twitched under the table, brushing against his leg. "Are you talking about engineering or bureaucracy?" "I am talking about this," Aaron said. He reached into his pocket. Sarah froze. Not again. "If you put another ring under a plate," Sarah warned, her eyes narrowing, "I swear to the stars, Aaron." "No plate," Aaron said quickly. "And no hiding." He placed a small velvet box on the table. He opened it. Inside was a ring. It wasn't made of dark, resonant metal. It didn't hum. It didn't control gravity. It was a simple band of silver, set with a small blue sky stone, the kind you could buy at the market for 50 credits. A ring with zero power, zero utility. Just a ring. "This one does not do anything," Aaron said softly. "It does not save the world. It does not stop storms. It just asks a question." He looked her in the eye. "Sarah Nix, you saved my life. You saved my daughter. You saved my city. But mostly you saved me from being a ghost." He took a breath. "I do not want to be the architect anymore. I just want to be the guy who burns the toast and loves you. Will you know how to stick around?" Officially, Sarah looked at the ring. Then she looked at the glowing tattoo on her finger, the bond of the lattice. Then she looked at Mira, who was holding her breath so hard, her face was turning blue. "You are an idiot," Sarah whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I know," Aaron said, "and you are a terrible tipper." "I am working on it," Sarah laughed. She took the ring out of the box. She slipped it onto her finger, right next to the glowing band of light. "Yes," she said, "I will stay. But I am keeping my name. Nix sounds cooler than coal." "Deal." Aaron exhaled a smile, breaking across his face like a second sunrise. "Finally!" Mira shouted, throwing her hands in the air. "I have been planning the wedding for 6 months. I already made the guest list. The sky whales are invited." Aaron pulled Sarah into a kiss, ignoring the applause that erupted from the few remaining patrons, and Goran, who was sobbing happily behind the counter. Outside the window, the amber light of the lattice pulsed, once a slow, warm throb of approval. The city of Cloudreach floated on, no longer held up by fear or sacrifice, but anchored firmly, unshakably, by the strongest force in the universe: love, and a really stubborn cat lady